Hi, my name is Erin Underwood. I'm with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and today I'm going to be talking about the North American Bat Monitoring Program. So I'm going to do a little overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about bats in the world, bats in Alaska, focus on the little brown bat a little bit, and then talk about what the North American Bat Monitoring Program is, what that means in Alaska, what grid cells we have, what equipment we use, and then how you can be bat friendly. So first, for bats across the world, bats are really interesting because they are extremely diverse. There's over 1,400 species of bat in the world. They're the second largest order of mammals, and they are in every continent except for Antarctica. We have the pallid bat, the Samoan fruit bat, these little Honduran bats. They can be as small as a bumblebee bat, or they can be as big as the giant golden-crowned flying fox, whose wingspan is about 6 feet. And there are even 3 species of vampire bat in the world. And so bats got their order name because they are a hand wing. So you can kind of see from this drawing that there are the different bones in the hands and arm, and then the bat wing, it's just kind of like a hand. So Chiroptera, the bat order, just means hand wing. And bats have this really interesting way of feeding. So this is called echolocation, and this is how bats get to hunt at night. So what they do is they fly around in the dark, and they kind of send out these little clicks and high-pitched sounds, and it hits something that they want to eat, like an insect, and then it bounces back, and they can kind of use that to those returning sound waves to see where these insects are, and then go after them. And it's very accurate, and they are very aerodynamic, and they can move with this wild speed. I've had bats, I've been out at night before, and I've been surrounded by bugs, and bats were flying around me catching all the bugs, which was nice. And I've had bats just fly at me going for a bug, and then they use their sonar to see me, and then they'll just make this hairpin turn, and it was so fast that I could just kind of feel them brush the side of my face as they went by. But it's very accurate hunting technique, and it works in the nighttime. So why do we need bats? So bats are actually really valuable to ecosystems. They are big plant pollinators. They are bioindicators of environmental change. So a bioindicator is an organism whose status in an ecosystem can be kind of looked at and use that as an indication of the health of the ecosystem. And so it can kind of reflect wider scale impacts. And bats are really good bioindicators because they are sensitive. They're sensitive to water quality, the presence of pollution, insect levels, pesticides. So any change in their population can reflect something like that. So they're really good to keep an eye on. And they also spread seeds. So they're very good for plant health, and they're a natural form of pest control. They are massive insectivores. They eat a lot of insects. And it's been estimated that if we lost North American bats, that could cost, more than $3.7 billion a year just from the free pest control that they provide. So bats are really important to the environment, and it's a really good thing that they're here. So speaking of bats that are here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the bats that we have in Alaska. So we have several species of bat in Alaska. We have the Keene's myotis, the long-legged myotis, California myotis, Yuma myotis, the silver-haired bat, and the little brown myotis, or the little brown bat. And the little brown bat is what we have here. So most of these species are only going to be in Southeast Alaska. And if you are outside of Southeast Alaska and you see a bat, it's probably going to be the little brown bat. They are the most widespread, and they are the most common. Even in the Southeast, they're the most common. So for the little brown bat, these guys are pretty small. They're only 5 to 9 grams. They weigh about as much as a new pencil. Their wingspan is 8 to 9 inches, not too big. And they are insectivores, like all bats in Alaska, so they only eat insects. And they rest in natural or man-made structures called roosts. So these can be dead trees that we call snags, crevices, old logs, stumps, little like rock wedges, things like that. So just kind of crawl in nice little spaces and rest. But they don't do it like on the East Coast. On the East Coast, little brown bats can congregate into hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of bats in these big caves. But our little brown bats don't do that. They kind of stick into smaller little groups of just like, sometimes just 1 or 2 bats, or maybe like, 5 or something. And they really only congregate when they are forming maternity colonies, when they are raising pups together. So yeah, they act a little bit differently than their East Coast counterpart. But they have this huge range. So you can see here that they have their East Coast, but they also go down into Mexico. They go all the way to the West Coast, and we've had reports of little brown bats all the way up in Kotzebue. So they're really widespread across the continent, and they're just kind of a cool little mammal that we have here. So how do bats live up here? How do they survive in Alaska? How do they survive the winter? So they have a few northern adaptations. So they do have a shorter foraging time because they need the darkness to kind of protect them from predators such as owls. And since we don't have as much darkness up here in Alaska, they have a little shorter foraging time. And so to make up for that, they do something called gleaning, which is where they will, instead of just flying through the air using echolocations to eat insects, they will kind of swoop low to the ground, and they will pluck off insects from the ground that are a lot more higher value. So like a spider has a lot more calories than a mosquito. So they will kind of swoop down and grab something big like that to sort of make up for the fact that we don't have as much dark time in Alaska. And then they also make use of tree cover. They kind of stay underneath the trees to help protect them from predators if they are out during the later hours. So they have these kind of adaptations against the fact that there's not much darkness that we have here. And then they also hibernate in human structures. So they hibernate in natural structures too, like rock crevices and trees and stuff, but they've also utilized what's here, which is human structures, such as abandoned cabins and things like that. And so they will reduce their heart rate and their breathing, their temperature drops to near freezing, and we call this a torpor state, where they just kind of, go on a power save mode. And that helps them survive the winter. So what do we know about little brown bats in Alaska? So actually research has been pretty recent, and there's a lot to discover. So we kind of know their range. It's broadly known. We know a few roost locations. There have been reports of bats, up across the state. But there are a lot of knowledge gaps. So we don't know their exact distribution. We don't know exactly what habitat they might use because there's such a wide range of land to look at, and we don't know everything about their life history and ecology. We just have kind of these isolated pockets, especially in the southeast, of research that we've done. And so this is information that would be really good to have because it would be baseline data that we can use to compare. So if we know what the bats need now and where they are and how many there are, then if that changes in the future, we'll be able to see those changes. And that can be important because the bats are the bioindicators, as I mentioned earlier. So any change in their population can be important kind of canary in the coal mine type of thing for changes in their environment. And there are things that could threaten them. So climate change, because they're sensitive to temperature, and environmental changes, and white nose syndrome, which is this invasive fungus from Europe that has been killing a lot of little brown bats and bats in general across North America. It hasn't gotten to Alaska yet, but it is something that we are watching out for, and something that this baseline data would help us if it ever got here. So this is a map of observations of the little brown bat, and you can see these little black dots are where they've been seen. So you can see a lot of them kind of in Anchorage and on the peninsula, just because there's a lot of people there, and then sort of these scattered reportings out across the state, and then our northernmost one is in Kotzebue. So these are where little brown bats have been reported around the state, which is all through citizen science efforts, and a lot of what we know about their range, which is really interesting and great to have. So part of this monitoring is the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And this is really cool. It's an international program to monitor bat populations across the continent. And so it is to watch for declines in bat populations and potential extinction risks. So it is looking at the 47 species of bat in Canada and the US and soon Mexico. And it involves mobile and stationary surveys, but the driving surveys are a little bit hard to do here because we don't have too many roads. So in the Anchorage area and in the Eklutna grid cell, we are going to just do stationary surveys. So the grid cells, I'll show that in a minute, that is how the map is divided so that we can survey one grid cell for bats in the area. And so we have 2 in Anchorage and we have 1 in Eklutna that just got added last year. So here's an example of that. These are our 2 grid cells in Anchorage. This is by Kincaid. This one is by Far North Bicentennial Park. And this is where we are going to set up audio recorders, our stationary detectors, to listen for the little brown bats. And then we have just added this grid cell last year. This is the Eklutna grid cell, and we have bats detected by the river, one by the road here, one by the ocean. And we are going to set those up again this year and see if we can get some more bats, which we know should be in the area from previous surveys. So what are we going to use to pick up these bats? So this is called an audio moth, and this is new bat detector technology. They're really small. You can kind of hold them in one hand. They're about that big. And they take, all they need is batteries and a micro SD card, and you can just kind of strap them to a little branch like that. They're really nice to have and kind of easy to use. And we need at least 2 of these audio moths per grid cell, and maximum of 4. Last year we had 4 in Eklutna and 2 in each of the Anchorage grid cells. And we're going to leave them out for at least 4 nights. Last year we left them out for a week. And we're going to deploy them on July 1st and then collect them on July 7th. And early July is when bats start to leave the roost with their new babies that are just learning how to fly. So early July is the best time to look for bats because that's when they are all out and learning to fly and collecting insects and kind of easy to pick up. So I talked about this a little bit before, but a few more threats to the little brown bat that monitoring like this can help. So there is the development in wind energy, which is usually a danger to flying animals such as bats and birds. And then there's the white nose syndrome, the invasive fungus, and then the climate change. And so using this monitoring, we can potentially find where bats hibernate or where they migrate to, what they rely on, and it can kind of help guide the future developments and better prepare us here in Alaska for if white nose syndrome ever gets here. So what are some tips that we can do to be bat friendly up here? So you can install a bat house. This can help with if you're trying to get bats out of your roof, for instance, you kind of give them somewhere else to go. Or you can keep up potential roosting sites that they might use, like a dead tree, which we call a snag. And if those aren't dangerous, they can be left up, and bats really like to hide in them and make little roosts in there and raise their pups. They are sensitive to pesticides, so reducing pesticides in your garden can help bats, and they are themselves nature's pest control, so that can be good. And they are also, cats go after them a little bit, so keeping your cat inside, especially at night when bats are out, that can help bats not get attacked by them, because cats are a large part of bat and bird mortality in North America. So these are just a couple of things that you can do to help out the bats in your neighborhood, and citizen science is a big part of our bat monitoring in Alaska because we just have such a wide area to cover, and bats are so dispersed. So that's, but it's really exciting to see what we might discover in the next few years. All right, well, thank you.